after white consolidates this position, the bishop's going to come to f3, targeting the c6 pawn. The bishop can sometimes go to b2, targeting the e5 pawn. So this is what I meant when I was saying that maybe white's advantage is not very big, but in practical terms, this is an unpleasant position for black to play. Instead of knight c4, which we'll return to in a moment, another logical move is knight b7, simply going the long way, trying to bring the knight to d8 and f7, from where it will control some important squares like d6, e5, g5, and h6. So here, for example, after d3, knight d8, bishop b2, for example, I looked at the move knight f7, and after bishop f3, for example, rook to c8, white plays knight e4. And still, the knight on f7 is being dominated. There's pressure on e5. White will simply improve the position, maybe with moves like g4, g5, maybe c4, restricting the bishop on e6 as well, maybe bring the king a little bit closer to the queen side. So it's difficult for black to make any progress. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be enough of an advantage to win as white, but you will definitely be able to create some problems here. So still, my money is on knight b7, knight d8, knight f7, although I would not like to have to play that endgame as black. But let's go back to the actual game. After knight c4, the bishop went back to c1, threatening d3, so black's only reasonable follow-up is to play pawn to e4. So giving back material, but trying to bring the knight to e5 and arguing that that's a good square, although that's not really a stable square for the knight, as we'll see. After bishop e2, knight e5, knight takes e4, white is going to play d4 and c4, establishing a massive pawn center. So here, let's play bishop g4. If bishop takes a2, this might look a little scary because of the presence of black's outside passer, but really after something like d4, knight f7, white is going to play bishop f3, targeting the pawn c6, and if bishop to d5, then white can play king d2, king d3, and c4. I really don't see a good way for black to stop us from doing this. For example, if, let's say, a5, just pushing the outside passer, that pawn's not really going to get past a4. So, for example, a5, king d3, a4, c4, I think already leads to a big advantage for white. And the same thing goes for rook b8. Black can't really make too much use of the b file. For example, after rook b8, king d3, rook b1, our bishop's under attack, but we can just go bishop d2, and c4 will come next. So notice how solid white's position is. Everything is protected. The bishop is anchored on f3, it defends the pawn on h5, the knight on e4. So very good coordination for white. Therefore, black played the move bishop to g4. And now after d4, bishop takes e2, king takes e2, knight g4, and pawn to c4. So this is a typical endgame that if you go in the database and you check out some of those 42 games, you're going to see a lot of endgames just like this one where white is down in exchange, has a couple of pawns, but black has hit a wall, can't really make his position improve in any way, and he just has to focus on keeping white's pawns at bay, which is a lot easier said than done. So white is already clearly better here. In the game, black played rook to f5, attacking h5, bishop g5, interfering with the rook, and after king f8, simply a4, and after a5, pawn to g3, knight h2, and h6. So white trades off his only real pawn weakness here, and that's going to allow the bishop to rejoin the game and help white prepare the d4, d5 pawn break. which, if is carried out, will give white 2 connected passed pawns and will pretty much end the game on the spot. And sure enough, that's what happened. After bishop to f4, knight g4, king to f3, knight h2, king g2, knight g4, king h3, and now after knight h6, of course, if we take on h6, that allows black to go rook h5, and I think that piece trade really is going to make black's life a lot easier. So white simply kept improving the king, and after knight g8, king g4, now the rook has to move, unfortunately for black, because if king to e6, simply knight g5 is going to win the rook probably, right? So king e6, knight g5, king f6, and well, actually maybe this doesn't win right away, but perhaps we can simply play our knight away, knight f3, threatening knight h4, and how is black going to defend this rook? Right? It looks like the rook is completely dominated, because if king g6, well, that just runs into knight h4, so that's game over. Same goes for a move like knight e7. The only other move would be to play king e6, trying to repeat the position, but here white can just go d5, and after pawn takes, knight d4. So it's a very curious case of domination. There's no way of defending this rook. So here the rook retreated, and after d5, white overcame the last hurdle and won very easily, actually in a few moves. So let's just see how the game ended. After king d7, king g5, knight e7, pawn to d6, knight back to g8, and after king g6, all of black's pieces look completely dominated. So king to e8, bishop to d2, and after rook to b7, now white starts pushing on both sides of the board. g4, rook a7, g5. Total domination against the knight on g8. King to f8, bishop to c3, and after king d8, knight d2. Black had enough and resigned. The knight is heading towards either d4 or e5, after which the c6 pawn will be lost, and that will give white 2 connected pass pawns, which will lead to a queen very, very soon. So anyway, this is my take on this very interesting but very risky knight g4 variation. I don't think it creates any serious problems for white from a theoretical point of view, but if you're not ready for it, you can definitely run into trouble, because black is good to go. Black is ready to go f5 and e4. So once again, this is the key idea that white needs to be on the lookout for in the fried liver, but so far everything is still under control. So thanks for listening. This has been Grandmaster Robert Hungaski for chesslecture.com.